Okay, can you hear me now? Did everybody get their name on a piece of paper? We have some prizes that we're gonna give away, and, if your name's not in the top, you won't win. So, okay. There's a lady right over here that needs one.
That's why we're asking.
Whoa. Did you get your name? Okay. Anybody else that didn't get their name?
Somewhere down there. Who else needs a paper?
Because we have some really fun gifts here.
Just throwing them everywhere.
I think we're good. Okay, ladies, and gentlemen, I don't see any gentlemen, but anyway. Oh, there he is. Okay. I'm happy to be here today. When I was asked to do this last fall, I was like, yeah, sure, I could do that. You know, I don't have anything going on. Well, now, let me tell you.
I have some extra papers.
I was grateful that they moved me up to this earlier time slot because I'm flying to Texas tomorrow. And it's gonna be lovely because it's gonna be cold here and it's gonna be really warm down there. So anyway, okay, so are we ready to start? I'm gonna give you a brief, hopefully interesting information about log cabins. Basically, all these quilts here today are some form of log cabin quilts. In 1863, the log cabin quilts became very popular to raise funds for the Union Army during the American Civil War. And as I understand it, a lot of women got together and made these quilts because the soldiers really were freezing. And I'm sure any of you who know anything about history have heard how terrible their conditions were. Anyway, it was thought to be in honor of Abraham Lincoln because he lived in a log cabin. The log cabins quilts became very popular, and I think they became popular because they're so easy to make. The log cabin block is such an easy block. But anyway, they were very popular for the 100-year anniversary of our nation, the Declaration of Independence, and that was in 1876. The general history of quilting is filled with lots of myths about the frugality of the quilters. You know, they took the clothes that were almost worn out and made quilts from those scraps and stuff. But contrary to popular belief, there really was quite a bit of fabric available to them, and it was reasonably very cheap. Probably they would be shocked if they knew what we were paying for it. You know, $14, $13, $14 a yard. There's a log cabin quilt in the Fielding collection, which was made by an unknown quilter in 1870. And this was a very popular time for log cabin symbolism and nostalgia of the old days of the early American frontier. The early pioneer settler home, the log cabin became an iconic symbol of taming of the wild frontier and for achieving the American dream itself. The log cabin symbol was so popular, a quilt style was named after it, which is the log cabin quilt. The style of the quilt called the log cabin is because of the pattern, and it is simply a square with the logs sewn around it. It could be a square or a triangle or a diamond, whatever. Traditionally, the center square is red for the fire of the home, or it's yellow for the light of the home. And obviously, we do whatever we want, but that was the original. Anyway, the log cabin block is simple to make, and by far, and as far as the piecing goes, it's the most forgiving for accuracy. Because if you have trouble sewing a straight seam, then just make a wonky log cabin. Or make the pieces a little bit wider and trim them along as you go. So there's a lot of simple ways to make the log cabin that can be very relaxing, and they're not nearly as stressful as some of the other blocks. The log cabin quilt block, I think, is one of the most versatile blocks. It can be combined with almost anything, and it easily mixes in to make some really wonderful designs. And the design possibilities are endless. And I have an array of quilts here to show you, but they by far are not even, they're just the tip of the iceberg of what's possible. And I do have a few that are a little different than what you would think of as a log cabin. And obviously with the log cabin, the color placement is what really makes it unique. And you just a little bit of change in the colors and you can have a whole different look. This is the quilt book that when I first started piecing quilts in the 1900s, it was about 1979 is about when I started really piecing quilts. And this book, I bought it at the Merc. I don't know if any of you remember where the Merc was, but anyway, and it was $8.95. And the lady who wrote this book, her method of sewing a log cabin block was taking a strip of fabric and then sewing all the pieces to it and then cutting in between them. And so my first few log cabins, that's how I made them. I'm sure that I look back down, I think they probably weren't all that square, but but they all went together and I was able to hand quilt them. And so it worked out fine. But now I know so much more than I did then, as we learn as we go. And so when I recommend that you starch your fabrics before you start, because by starching your fabric, when you get a much more accurate cut. If your fabrics are kind of loosey-goosey when you go to cut, it's just not going to cut straight. And then your pieces are not going to fit together quite as nicely, and then your block is going to look wonky. And that's okay if that's the look you're going for. But anyway, so I do recommend that you start your fabric before you start cutting. And that's true with any quilt, any piecing. I think it makes a huge difference. And you can use any kind of starch. You can use the cheap stuff that you get at Walmart, or you can buy the more expensive Best Press, or whatever suits your fancy. It doesn't really matter. But the starch will add stability to your fabric. And some fabrics nowadays we still have fabrics that kind of fray a lot. And the starch will help with that. It will keep it from fraying so badly. And I'm afraid to wait or see no else. But anyway, those are some tips that I have learned over the years. The other thing is, if you're cutting a lot of strips that are the same color, rather than cut across the width of the fabric, if you will cut, say you need, 24.5-inch strips. If you will cut one 4.5-inch strip across your fabric and then subcut it into the size you need, those strips will not have as much stretch as the going across. And so here again, your fabric is more stable and you get a better, it'll sew up better and stay where it belongs. So always press your block as you go and press it away from the center square. And you always put the piece you're adding on top when you're putting it through the machine. So you're adding your piece that you're adding always goes on top. And this is true also when you're putting a border on a quilt or anything like that. If you'll put the piece on top, you'll have much better luck, because the feed dogs have a tendency to kind of gather up, and so you don't get as much accuracy as you will if you put it on top. Plus, you can control that little piece a little better if it's on top, and it won't slip away and not be caught in the seam like it should be. So, are there any questions about any of that? Do you have anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm sure that you're all very experienced quilters, so, oh, yes,
I was just gonna say, you talked about the art of the quilt. Per Eleanor Burns, who I go by rather than I didn't start quilting back then, the light side of the quilt is the happy times of the family, and the dark side of the quilt is the not so happy, you know.
that's kind of depressing, isn't it?
I think it's cool.
Okay,
Just to rephrase, so you were saying when you cut your strips, they should be parallel to the salvage,
if you're cutting, if you
meaning the
have,
long strip.
yes, if you have to cut, say your lights are all the same, and you're making 40 blocks, so you need 40 2-inch strips, and they are going to be, well, they'll range in size, but say you've got to have 40 4.5-inch strips. If you will take a 4.5 strip, 4.5 inch, and cut it the width of the fabric, and then subcut it into 2-inch strips, then you've got to see, do you understand what I'm saying?
The width of the fabric, are
Yes.
we talking
You can-
salvage?
Yes, you
That
salvage to
direction, Not
salvage.
off the end,
If you cut salvage to salvage,
okay,
and then your 4.5-inch strip, then you subcut
Okay.
that strip into your 2-inch pieces. That will give you a more stable piece. The other thing is, cut your salvages off. Every once in a while, I have someone bring me a quilt to quilt for them, and that you can see the salvage. Are we really that close on fabric that we can't afford to get rid of that 1/8 of an inch?
$14 a yard.
I know it is, but, you know, it can really ruin your, you know, the overall look. And the sad thing is, we don't always notice it. You know, we didn't cut it off, and then we get our quilt together, and we're like, oh no. Now I've got this piece of salvage that's showing in my, and that's okay if that's what you want, but, you know, your way is the best way, so, anyway. I'm certainly not here to tell you that there are no quilt police, so, okay. These first quilts that I'm gonna show you, this little stack right here, are from my friend Kim Peel, who, if you don't know her, she's a professional quilter and it's a designer. She designs fabric for Henry Glass, and she used to teach classes all over the world, but then she got tired of traveling, and so now she just works at home and designs fabric, designs patterns, she designs books. She has so many books, I think she probably has close to 20 books that are out there. And so if you haven't ever seen one of her books or anything, they probably have some here in the library. Yeah, they do. So anyway, she was kind enough to let me borrow some of her quilts. So I'm going to show you her quilts first, so that when they fold them up, they'll put them back in a pile and I won't get hers mixed up. So anyway, this is a cute little wall hanging, and you can see the log cabin, and you can see what she, that you can add anything with the log cabin. So Kim is very creative with her use of fabrics. These are all fabrics that she has designed. I love her fabrics because I like that country look, and so they're by far my favorites. And those are her colors, because all of these are her fabrics. And she is an amazing designer. And I can't remember what these look like, so, but these are her patterns. And they're in her different books. Her books are called Simple something. I mean, each one has simple in the title. And her piecing methods are very simple. She has an amazing way of doing applique. Once I learned her method of applique, it just made applique so much easier. So if you haven't ever read one of her books or looked at one of her patterns, She is currently designing for Fat Quarter Shop. If you're familiar with, they are out of Texas. Kim Deal, and it's spelled Diehl. And if you Google her, you will see her books, and Terry said there are some of her books here. So
She's really fun on Instagram because she's always got little photos, so you can just get right on with her and work on one day.
yes, yes, she has a wonderful sense of humor, and she's definitely one of my good friends, and she has a couple of little granddaughters that when her husband, I quilt for her, so her husband comes back and forth bringing me the quilts and picking them up, and sometimes he brings the granddaughters with him, and so they are adorable. And I don't remember the names of these, but now this is an interesting log cabin because this is a non-traditional, but you can see that it's made in the log cabin format, but it's completely different than where it doesn't have the light and dark side.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that interesting?
Terry, can you guys come over and this way a little bit closer for us? Sorry, Terry.
Yeah, just walk over, maybe walk over that way.
Just lay on my lap for a minute.
Yeah. And these quilts have been in national magazines, and they've been shown at national shows. So we're really honored to be able to show them here. And when I quilt for Kim, she tells me which pattern she wants, how she wants it quilted. So I don't make that decision. She tells me what she wants. Anyway, so you can see just by the difference in these, how many ways you can use a log cabin. Now, this particular quilt is my grandson's wedding quilt, and they were nice enough to let me borrow it back, and I'm really impressed because they've had it for about 5 years, and it's still in really good shape. So, sometimes we give our quilts to our children or our grandchildren, and then we see them in the dog bed or wherever. And so I'm grateful that, and these were the colors that they wanted. This pattern is an Eleanor Burns pattern, and I believe it's called Log Cabin Star. And it's a fairly simple quilt to make, but it's a pain in the tush because you have to get those. It just seemed like it took me a lot more time to make that than it should have. And that, and like I said, I'm really impressed that they've taken such good care of it. So they love it. And, well, his wife is from this area, so her mother and grandmother were quilters, so I think okay, so this is a scrappy log cabin, and these are huge blocks. This is one of my favorites. I love the scrappy look, and most of these are just literally, yes, these, I'm sorry, but I make big quilts because I want them to fit on the beds. But this quilt is just made literally from scraps, and so you can see that the pieces are just total random colors. Oh, do they? Okay. Yeah, you can get the what's it, the AccuCut now that,
The library has it.
yeah.
They have a log cabin thing. All you have to do is check the template out, take it home. It's true.
I'm impressed with the Shelley Library. I wish that the community would give them a bigger building because they really make good use of their facility. But they do a lot with what they have, so. I'm sorry, there are a few here that aren't really huge, but most of them are big. Yeah. This one is really fun. This is a snail's trail with the log cabin block. And here again, it's the thing that makes this so striking is the color placement. I don't usually work with bright colors as much as I do more of the country colors, but I do like this. But I hated making the snail's trail block because they just really gave me fits to get them exactly the right size. These are 9-inch blocks or 9.5 unfinished. And so you can see how the log cabin blocks hold their own with anything. And so, you know, you can make a bunch of log cabin blocks and lay them out, and you can lay them out and then move them around and mess around with them until and then pretty soon you can't remember which one you like the best. So my suggestion is when you're doing that is take a picture each time you lay them out so that you can remember what it looked like 3 times ago. When I first started making log cabins, we didn't have the phones like we have now. So that with the cameras. So this one isn't quite as big. And the flowers on this are not appliqued on. I showed this somewhere else, and some of the people thought they were appliqued, but it's in the fabric. It's just the fabric that has those.
It's a neat way to use them.
Thank you, yes. You know, we all buy fabric that we really like, and then we get it home and wonder, what the heck are we gonna do with it? Especially if we've put it on the shelf for a while and we've forgotten why we felt so inspired to buy it, right? Okay, now this one is this is just a little quilt, and this is the round log cabin. So I made this small enough. The interesting thing is I have a good friend, and when he saw it, he said that he fell in love with this little quilt because he said when him and his wife were first dating, they were playing the game that what is it called where you? Yes, and Twister. And so he thought that's what it reminded him of. And so he doesn't have any grandchildren, doesn't have any married children yet, but I'm going to give it to them for their first grandchild, which it'll be a few years down the road, hopefully. Okay, and this is another one that is kind of a demo. This shows you what you can do with a log cabin. It doesn't have to be just a square. This one kind of gives you an optical illusion. It makes it look like it's twisted. And this is formed by making the larger, your light color on this one, I think, is the larger strips. And then the colored is the more narrow strips. I think they were 1.5 inches to start with. So this is such a fun look. It's interesting that these are still log cabin blocks, but the design makes it look like it's something else. And here again, this is in bright color.
Should you just make that up with your
I saw a picture of it. So,
There's a book in the library that has this.
oh, really? Well, there you go.
I mean, we have hundreds of cookbooks. There's a book.
This isn't something though you really need a pattern for, because once you make the blocks, it's a matter of just twisting them. And so that's one of the advantages to the log cabin block, is you can lay them out in so many different ways. What makes this look so it's kind of twisted, the same with the circle, is the narrower strips with the wider strips. So, and the bigger difference between, the larger the difference is between the sizes of your strips will give you more curl. The problem is that means you have to sew more strips on, because the narrower they are, to get them to come out to the right size. But usually a 2 or a 2.5 inch wide strip, and then a 1.5 to a 1 1/4 is all, that will give you this look. 2.5 to 2 inches. You decide which one. I usually use a 2 inch. I don't go any bigger than that. But that's just my preference. And then the more narrow one is either 1.5 inches or 1 1/4 inches. And that's what gives you that twisted look, that curve. Okay, so this one is made with log cabin block, and it has kind of a star block that goes with it. And this thing is huge, and I'm sorry. She didn't say I had to bring little quilts, so I don't have a lot of little quilts.
You fold it in half and you can fold it all up.
Yeah, you got the idea.
Thank you.
This pattern is by Jackie Robinson, and I don't remember the name of it, but it's an old pattern. It's been out for a long time. I had the pattern for years and kept thinking I wanted to make it, and finally I had to talk myself into it, that I could actually do it. Because it is a little more complicated, and it's not, the making it is not complicated, but putting it together is a little more complicated. So I would say maybe an intermediate is what I would class it as. However, if you're a beginner, sometimes when you're a beginner, you're not smart enough to know how hard it is. So then you just dive right in and you make the hardest quilt you'll probably ever make. And that's kind of what happened to me. I made a Lone Star for one of the first quilts I ever made, because I loved the look of it. I didn't realize it was supposed to be that hard. And now this one is just a basic log cabin, but it has 2 different blocks in it. And so that's what gives it this curve around the border. Yeah, it should be square, so it shouldn't matter. That's okay. Okay, so you can see, I'm sorry, you can see that the border on this has kind of a curved look to it. And this quilt has 36 blocks in the border, and they're made one way. And then there's 64 blocks that are made another way. But that's what gives it the look of the curved border. And the backing on this is Kim's fabric. It's her design. I love this backing. It's 108 wide, so that makes it. But most of those fabrics in there are her fabrics too.
What pattern was that one?
It isn't a commercial pattern. I saw a picture of it and I liked it, and so I figured out how to make it. But if you want to send me if you want to give me your information, I will give you the information on the blocks. Because I don't know that it's a commercial pattern. If I just saw a picture of it. This one is one that, in fact, this is the last one that I just made, not very long ago. But I fell in love with it because it was so different. I knew I was going to do this class or this presentation. And so I thought it would be such a fun thing to add. And this is really a simple quilt, but it looks completely, it just has such a striking look to it.
Oh, my goodness. On point.
And so it's such an easy, here again, I saw a picture of this. So I don't really, but it's just a simple block. It's the regular log cabin block. That's all it is. It's a very quick to make because, you know, and it's the colors that make the quilt.
Yeah, and the layout.
So you can, you know,
Jamie, do you want me to? Yeah. Oh, please.
That does look like a fan.
Okay.
well, and if you turn it the other way, you know, like put this end up, it looks a little different. Whoops. Oh,
Yeah.
just a second. Okay. You're doing the hard work. Anyway, isn't this fun? I just love this quilt because it's so simple. The hardest part about it is calculating your inset pieces, which isn't a big deal. Oh. Anyway, I just thought this was such a fun design. I did bring some blocks so that you could kind of see if you know, like this one is a sample of how to make the circle blocks, how to make it look like a circle. And this is just four regular blocks. But you can see the color is, I think it's an inch and a half, and I think these are 2 inches. Yes.
Okay, so when you see a picture, and you're gonna make a quilt, do you grasp it out on grass paper first?
No, I should. But I just look at it. And, you know, this is one of the things, if you're a beginning quilter, we were all beginners at some point. And so I think sometimes we feel a little intimidated when we see somebody who makes amazing quilts and you just think, I'll never be able to do that. But it's like learning to play the piano. You can't sit down and play Mozart the first time you sit down. You have to learn, and it's a step-by-step process. And I happen to be able to do that. I can look at a pattern and see how to make it, and I'm able to do that. So not everybody can do that, and that's okay. You know, we all have different talents, so I can't play the piano, so that's for sure. But, okay, so here's another one. Here's another sample. And this is the opposite. But you can see how the color placement changes the look of it. Nancy, this is the block that was in that first big quilt that, and the difference, these blocks, this is 2 inches and these are 1.25 inches. So you can see there's quite a difference between the two.
Can you turn it back this way?
Yes, and if you want the measurements, they're written on them. Because this is, when I do a pattern then I don't have a pattern.
Oh, you did, and I can see it in the picture.
I put the numbers, I write the numbers on mine. A lot of times if I'm making a quilt that I've not made before, I will make a sample block out of whatever, so that I can kind of figure out, not necessarily Well, I try to figure out two or three things. One, I want to make sure that the fabrics I've picked are going to look as well as I think they're going to look in the place that I'm gonna put them. And I also wanna make sure that I can put the piece together and, you know, that it's gonna come out like it's supposed to. But I also look at, is there an easier way to do it? Because sometimes the designers are really smart and they make it more complicated than it needs to be. And so for those of us who are maybe down the list of, we're not geniuses, but we know how to do this, then if you look at it and you maybe make a sample block and like, oh, I can see an easier way, or I can see a way that I can make this quilt and not use as much fabric as they said. And that has happened a few times to me. One time I had a quilt that I was going to make, and it called for, I don't know, 5 3/4 or 6 yards of backing. And I wanted to use this, background. And I wanted to use this specific piece in the quilt, but I only had 5 1/4 yards. And it was an older fabric. I knew I couldn't buy any more. So I sat down and wrote, figured out how much I had by cutting it the way I told you, by cutting it across this way and subcutting. I was able to use the 5 1/4 yards and I actually had a teeny bit left over. So there are times when the patterns are written, and they're not always right, and they're not always as efficient as they could be. So, you have to kind of judge for yourself. Let's see if there's anything else in this pile that's relevant. There is this, but I have to show you this quilt first. This is the last one. And this quilt, I fell in love with this because it is so different. And this is all log cabin blocks. There's nothing else in it. So, but here again, remember, it's color placement. So I think that when you look at this, this is called Clambone, and it's made, the pattern is designed by let's see, I can't think of her name right now. Anyway, she's an older quilter, and
Some of us are.
this is, what was her name? I can't think of her name. Anyway, you can see, and if you'll turn it around, I think you actually got it upside down. But that's okay. It's, yeah, switch sides here. There you go. That's okay. It's nice to see it from both angles. But you can see how it kind of has that clamshell look. And this was such a fun quilt to make. And it's not hard to make, but the way you have to make it is you make the first row, and then you have to kind of figure it out from there. Because each one is interactive with the block before it. So isn't this fun? I just think this is one of the funnest quilts I've ever seen as far as a log cabin. It's just completely different. And it looks amazing on the bed. It really does. It looks. And I do have a little section of that block of that here, so I can show you how it goes together. I was gonna bring my design board, but I think I left it in the kitchen. But you can kind of see how this works. So you have to have, as you're putting it together, each block interacts with the other block. And so that's why you make the first row and then you go from there. So each block, you look at it and you think, okay, now, I don't know if I want the camera to see my better. Okay, let me see here. Right, here's a sample of what, yeah. So can you see how that goes together? So this is the block here. So when you get your row going here, you have to have, this block has to have the color that goes with this. Each color has the same number of segments. In other words, it has 2 of the larger strips and 2 of the smaller strips. Every single color, except for on the corners or the edges. And on that quilt, I kind of put the fabrics I didn't like, I kind of put them on here. Yeah, and technically, it goes this way. Technically. Well, it's okay. But you can see it, and as we finish here, if you want to come and look at any of these, you're welcome to look at these blocks and see. But remember, when you're making a log cabin, you start with the center. The center can be any size. You can use a little motif of some sort. You can make you can use a 6.5 inch. There's no rules. You can do whatever you want. And so there's just there are endless possibilities. Are there any questions?
No, but on that center idea, I made one where the center stayed in the corner.
Yeah, the offset. Mhm. Yeah, in fact, Kim has one. It's actually on the cover of one of her books that I actually made for her, and it's an offset log cabin. So instead of having the blocks in the center and go out, it's offset on the side. Any other questions?
When you talk about the width of your strips, is that the finished?
No, I'm
Or is
talking
it
about
all
the
width?
unfinished.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
includes the.
But here again, take some of your scraps and experiment, because you'll be surprised at what you can do with them. Any other questions? The log cabin is by far one of my favorite blocks because it is so versatile. And it's easy to make. It's mindless sewing. So, if you are having trouble getting your seams accurately, if you take a piece of painter's tape and put on your machine where the 1/4 inch and put 2 or 3 layers together, or you can use anything that'll make it so that you have that seam accurate. And then, like I said, always put the strip you're adding on the top. So any other questions? Okay, well, if you want to look at these, you're welcome to look at them. So thank you, ladies. Oh, we got a dog. Is there anybody in here whose name, they didn't get their name on a paper? Okay, we've got a couple over here, so.